Hello and welcome to this edition of Top Story. Today, Greece is facing a crippling strike as more than 1 million workers have been urged to shun work in protest of the government's strict austerity measures. The government says these moves are imperative in order to drastically reduce the country's massive budget deficit. Athens police are also bracing themselves for potential clashes as demonstrators are expected to take to the streets in anger at the government's cuts. So will Greece's beleaguered Prime Minister George Papandreou be able to save his nation from a financial abyss? Joining me today to talk about this is A.S Fatemi, a finance professor at the American University in Paris. George, again, thanks for joining us. Let's start off with today's protests. What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, I'm from the American Graduate School. Formerly, no problem. But basically, I think what is happening in Greece today is very essential. It's not only a battle for Greece, I think it's a battle for Europe and for the soundness of the international financial situation. I think the courage that Prime Minister Papandreou has shown is exemplary. And it is very fortunate that at this critical juncture in Europe and in Greece, there's a socialist government in power there, because otherwise we would have seen many more demonstrations. Now, Greece should not be left alone. I think the outcome of what happens in Greece is going to affect, most probably, not only euro, but the stability of international finance. As you know, we are just coming out of a major worldwide crisis. And if this particular juncture does not turn the way everyone expects it to, I think we enter an era of totally unknown sphere that no one has ever been there. First of all, it's euro, which is in danger, as you know.
So, I mean, if these protests were to succeed, I mean, where would that leave the government? It would be disastrous, wouldn't it?
Well, I think this is what I would call the abyss. I mean, it not even can't even imagine that the government of Greece can back down from this minimum that it has suggested. And it's very fortunate that with the additional 4.8 billion in additional taxes and government savings, the markets reacted very positively, and the spread between the German bond and the Greek bond narrowed. This is a very, very good reception, because we know whatever happens in Greece, next in line is going to be UK, which has a budget deficit even bigger than Greece. But of course, they are not part of the euro, and then there is more confidence. Their rating is much higher by the rating agencies. Greece's rating is in danger. And as you know, we have in line then Portugal, Italy, Spain, Ireland. So everyone is really keeping their fingers crossed, praying for the situation in Greece. And my personal prediction is that it's going to be a very difficult period, but the Prime Minister will succeed in convincing the population that better days are ahead.
So you think he can pull it off, but his finance minister likened what's happening to changing the course of the Titanic in the last few hours. They're not exactly words of confidence, are there, from the government?
Part of it, I think, is both the finance minister and the prime minister have a very delicate task, because not only they're talking to the Greek electorate, they also have to convince their European partners and the international community as a whole not to leave Greece alone. And that's why you see the Prime Minister goes to the United States, not only to talk to Mr. Obama, but also to be close to IMF, which they have not officially asked for help yet, but they have never also said, we are not going to ask IMF. So part of this speech and the rhetoric that we see has to do with the international posture to be enough alarming for the rest of the world, not for people to turn their head and this is a Greek problem, we have nothing to do with it. No, it is not. It's a European problem. It's a world problem.
And it has massive consequences.
Yes.
I mean, given his frantic trips in recent days to Washington, to Paris, to Berlin, I mean, he did manage to get a pledge from President Obama to take issue with those speculators who apparently are worsening this whole crisis. I mean, has he managed to achieve anything from those trips alone?
I think so. The first part is that I think it's a subliminal message to the Greek people that we are not alone, that you have a prime minister who has a hearing in Paris, in Berlin, in Washington, which is very important. Because if you listen to some of these demonstrators and unions and so on, they somehow feel like they are being abandoned. Their anger is more directed toward the German, but it is really toward the whole international community. Now, I mean, it's too late to say Greek was not ready for Euro. I mean, those things are the past. We can talk about those things. The fact is that Greek is part of Euro, cannot get out. There's no way in Maastricht Treaty that the country can withdraw. Therefore, I think his international trips serve two purposes. One is to reassure the Greek population that they're not alone. And at the same time, what it does is basically telling the people that what they're doing is the right way and they're moving the right direction.
So you talked there about, basically allaying fears of the Greek population. How did Greece get to this point? What does it say about the financial culture in the country in order for this to have happened?
There we have a basic structural problem. When Euro was devised, they came up with the idea of having a single currency, a monetary union for Europe. But you never have that in any other country. Where you have a common monetary policy, you also need to have a common fiscal policy, which means a single treasury. In other words, you can't have a government which runs taxes and spending, and then somewhere in Frankfurt, somebody else decides the monetary policy. Now, that is a major political issue that after Greece will have this problem will remain until Europe gets enough political strength to pull together itself and have the political will to have a fiscal policy. So this is really not to blame the Greeks for that. That is the structural problem with Euro and the fact that every bond which is issued is in Euro, but different governments are behind it. And I think this is the first warning, and it will not be the last. Whatever is decided for Greece really will be an example for the other countries down the line.
So let's broaden it out a bit. I mean, you talked about the impact on Europe as a whole. I mean, what impact is it having on the euro? Could, in fact, what's happening in Greece actually eventually lead to the collapse of the euro?
I doubt it very much. No, I don't think that's possible. I think we are beyond that. Europe as an economic power, it's not to anyone's interest. What is happening, and may probably follow for a while with the same trend, is the weakening of the euro, which incidentally is not bad for Europe. Because of all the problems that the dollar has, euro had risen beyond the limit. Remember, it started at 117, went down to 82 cents, and now it's up to 1.
So there's been a rebalancing.
It's a rebalancing, and it's good for exports. It's good for Europe, as long as it remains within the line. I don't think euro is in danger. Euro is now 20% of the world reserves. It's the second currency next to dollar and coming up.
Just finally, very briefly, my last question is, there's been much discussion about the creation of a European monetary fund as a result of this crisis. Would another regulatory body like that be enough to stem what's happening in Greece?
Well, the idea of having a European IMF is not only for the regulations, but it is also to be a lender of last resort, like the Federal Reserve System in America, which means when there are countries that are in trouble, it is shortage of liquidity. They don't have enough assets. So they could go to the mother hen, to the lender of last resort. And the fact that there is such an organization, it reassures confidence, and countries will not get to the critical problems and stages as Greece is today. So it would be a reassuring and also a very necessary thing, and I hope it's taken seriously.
Okay, well, that's it for today's Top Story. Join us tomorrow at the same time for another edition. Until then, goodbye.